I still remember the jittery feeling in my fingertips when I found the house dark and quiet, every shadow stretching long in the dim light of the hallway lamp. My wife was supposed to be home hours ago, and I'd imagined her fussing over dinner or curled up on the couch with a magazine. But instead, the living room stood empty, the kitchen cold. I called her name once, twice, my voice echoing back. Then I saw the note on the kitchen table, a plain scrap of paper with 4 words scrawled in a shaky hand. "Don't look for me." My stomach dropped and my heart pounded so loudly I could feel it in my ears. She was gone without explanation and I had no idea why. That night, I could hardly sleep, haunted by the words I never thought I'd see from her. But the real shock came the next morning when I answered a call from a number I didn't recognize, and a voice introduced itself as belonging to the FBI. I didn't even know how to process that. The agent, who gave his name as Graham, sounded polite but urgent, saying he needed to speak with me in person. My first instinct was denial. I'd done nothing illegal and I couldn't fathom my wife Lena being involved in anything criminal. She was a paralegal at a small downtown law firm, the sort of woman who always paid bills on time and never sped through traffic lights. Yet the agent insisted, so I reluctantly agreed to meet him at the local FBI field office. After hanging up, I stared at the silent phone, the note from Lena still crumpled in my other hand. I went outside and sat on our porch steps, the early morning sun offering no warmth to my confusion and dread. I tried calling her phone once again, but it went straight to voicemail. I considered calling her close friend, Tasha, but something in my gut told me to wait. If Lena wrote, "Don't look for me," maybe Tasha was part of whatever reason she'd left. Or maybe Tasha was as clueless as I was. That entire morning stretched on in agonizing slowness. I paced the kitchen, glancing at her empty mug on the counter, the groceries we'd bought just 2 nights prior. The bananas had started to go brown already. My mind kept cycling. Did she leave me for someone else? Did she flee to escape some hidden debt or threat? None of it made sense. In the middle of that mental storm, I remembered how restless she'd been recently, complaining about stress at work. But never had she hinted at leaving me, or disappearing in such a cryptic, dramatic fashion. I was tempted to tear her note apart in frustration, but instead, I tucked it into my wallet like a talisman of confusion. Maybe the FBI would want to see it. Driving to the field office felt surreal. The building was a squat structure in an industrial park, surrounded by tall fences and official-looking cars. Agent Graham met me in the lobby, wearing a suit and a solemn expression. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and escorted me to a small, nondescript room. There, he and another agent, a woman named Doherty, began asking me questions that set my heart racing. How long had I known Lena? How did she behave recently? Did I know anything about her involvement in undisclosed legal cases or dealing with clients that might raise red flags? The barrage of inquiries was relentless, and I answered as best I could, my confusion mounting each time they asked about suspicious behavior. I stammered that Lena was the most law-abiding person I knew, a stickler for detail. Why was the FBI interested in her? They exchanged glances. Agent Graham cleared his throat and explained that my wife's name had surfaced in an ongoing investigation, which they couldn't fully disclose. He said they were concerned for her safety and mine. That last part chilled me. They asked if she'd left any indication of a threat or if she'd told me about a possible relocation. When I mentioned the note, they tensed. "Don't look for me," I muttered, repeating her exact words. Agent Doherty scribbled it in her notebook. She asked me to describe Lena's firm, her co-workers, and any strange phone calls or events I'd noticed in recent weeks. I had nothing solid to share, just the sense that Lena was quietly unhappy with something but never spelled it out. Their questions took about an hour. By the end, I felt exhausted, like I'd run a mental marathon. They didn't divulge specifics, but I gleaned that Lena was somehow swept into a case involving financial crimes or money laundering. That was my guess anyway. Maybe her boss at the law firm was dirty, or she'd stumbled onto evidence that put her in danger. The agents offered me a phone number to call if I heard from Lena or had new details. Then they let me go, leaving me standing in the parking lot, reeling from the thought that my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, was tangled in something big enough to involve federal investigators. I drove home in a haze. The surreal nature of it all kept hitting me in waves. First, her abrupt disappearance. Second, the cryptic note telling me not to search for her. Third, the FBI. My phone beeped with a text from an unknown number and my heart leapt. Could it be Lena? But it was just a spam message. The disappointment cut deep. That night, I tried cooking dinner to distract myself, but I nearly burned everything. The house smelled like charred pasta sauce, a fitting metaphor for how everything in my life felt scorched and out of control. Sleep was impossible. My mind churned with possibilities. Was Lena a whistleblower running from a dangerous mob? Was she an accomplice fleeing justice? I hated the second idea but had no reason to dismiss it outright. I got up at dawn to rummage through our home office searching for clues. Her laptop was gone, which I hadn't noticed before. So was the file folder she kept for personal projects. Meanwhile, her clothes and toiletries were mostly still here. She'd left in a hurry. Did that mean she expected me to mail her belongings somewhere? The more I looked, the less sense it made. Why take a laptop but not clothes? I called Tasha. She answered groggily, asking if everything was okay. I mentioned Lena. Tasha sounded genuinely surprised, claiming she knew nothing about Lena's disappearance. They'd hung out a few weeks ago, Tasha said, but Lena didn't mention plans to leave. If Tasha was lying, she hid it well, but I sensed she was as clueless as me. My frustration mounted. Even her own best friend was kept in the dark? The next day, the FBI called me again to ask if Lena had reached out. She hadn't, and I told them so. The agent, Doherty this time, voiced concerns about my safety. She recommended I change my routine, maybe stay with a friend in case someone tried to find me. That warning unnerved me even more. She wouldn't explain the threat though. So I found myself checking the locks repeatedly, eyeing every car that passed my street. I felt paranoid, yet with no real direction. I was left with the question, what did Lena get mixed up in? That question clung to my thoughts even as I went to work, tried to maintain normalcy. My boss noted my distracted state but didn't pry. Co-workers sensed something was off. Maybe they noticed how my phone never left my side or how I jumped whenever it rang. Each day, I half expected an unknown caller to be Lena, explaining everything. But day after day, only silence. I spent evenings combing through old photo albums, looking for signs of discontent or hints that she was living a double life. Nothing. She always looked happy or at least comfortable next to me in those snapshots. After a week, the FBI asked me to come in again. I arrived feeling a mixture of dread and hope. Maybe they'd found her. In a stark interview room, Graham and Doherty told me they'd uncovered evidence linking Lena's boss to a major financial crime ring. Something about laundering large sums for international clients. They suspected Lena discovered incriminating files, so the ring might want her silenced. Alternatively, if she was complicit, she might have fled before the net closed in. My entire body chilled. The concept that my wife could be complicit stung like betrayal. Yet, the idea she was in mortal danger terrified me more. They asked if she had any contacts in other states, any place she might hide. I mentioned an aunt who lived far away in a remote part of the country, but I hadn't heard from that aunt in years. The agents scribbled it down. They repeated that I should remain vigilant. My heart hammered with each caution. That night as I lay awake, I whispered into the darkness, "Where are you, Lena? And why can't you trust me enough to tell me?" A few days later, my phone buzzed with a restricted number. My pulse skyrocketed as I answered, voice trembling. Silence for a moment, then I heard her. "I'm okay," she said softly, her tone choked with emotion. "Don't worry about me." I nearly cried out her name, but she quickly shushed me. "I can't talk long. I just need you to know I'm safe. And, don't try to follow me, Jake. It's for your protection." I frantically asked questions, but she wouldn't answer. She said, "Trust me. I'll come back when it's safe." Then the line went dead. I shouted her name into an empty dial tone. I called the FBI right after, informing them. They asked if I recognized background noises, or if she'd mentioned a location. I didn't have anything concrete. They told me to keep them updated if she reached out again. My hopes soared though, because at least I knew she was alive. That single phone call lit a spark of optimism. Maybe she was in witness protection or something similar, trying to stay out of the crosshairs. I prayed that was the case, because the alternative, that she was running from justice, hurt me to my core. Days slipped into weeks. No more calls. I resumed my lonely routine, balancing the weight of her disappearance with the demands of everyday life. My mother urged me to file a missing persons report, but I explained that the FBI was already involved and that Lena had made contact, seemingly by choice. A part of me raged at her for doing this alone, shutting me out, but another part felt pride that maybe she was protecting me from a dangerous criminal ring. I felt torn between anger and admiration. Then one late afternoon, I found a simple postcard in my mailbox. It pictured a desert landscape, no city name. On the back, in her handwriting, "I'm sorry. I love you. L." My eyes welled with tears. A date stamped from somewhere in the Southwest. I phoned the FBI, passing along the postmark. They took note, said they'd investigate. That night, I held the postcard to my chest, torn between relief that she still cared and sorrow that we were reduced to cryptic messages. Finally, about a month after that card arrived, the phone woke me at midnight. Another restricted number. I answered breath-tight. The voice was Lena's again, trembling. "Jake, I'm tired of running. I can't do this alone anymore." Her words poured out in hushed desperation. She revealed she'd inadvertently discovered her boss's secret money laundering files, realized how deep it went, and made the mistake of confronting him. Instead of going to the FBI or me, she panicked, thinking she'd keep me safe by disappearing. A woman claiming to be from the FBI approached her, but Lena suspected infiltration by the criminal ring. She fled. She only realized later that the real FBI had tried to contact her. She spent weeks in motels, changing identities, living in fear of being tracked. But the mental toll was crushing her. "Jake, I need your help," she whispered, voice cracking. I was overwhelmed, a swirl of relief, anger, and confusion. "Tell me where you are," I insisted. "The actual FBI is involved. They can protect you. I'll tell them everything." She sobbed, admitting she was somewhere in Arizona but out of money. She felt cornered, alone, suspicious of everyone. My heart ached for her. Despite the betrayal, I wanted to help. But how? We arranged a clandestine meeting, me promising to notify the legitimate FBI agents. She reluctantly agreed. And so, a plan formed. I'd drive halfway, meet her at a rest stop in the desert. The FBI would follow discreetly to ensure her safety. The next morning, I told Agent Graham about it. He insisted we coordinate carefully to avoid tipping off any criminals. They set up a small team to trail me. The entire scenario felt like a scene from a spy film, me trembling at the thought of seeing Lena again after so long, in such dire circumstances. That evening, I embarked on a long drive, mind racing with what I'd say when I saw her. Would I scream, cry, or just hold her? My chest pounded every mile. The rest stop was a lonely place, one gas station, a diner with flickering neon, the desert horizon stretching in every direction. I parked, scanning for any sign of Lena. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I see you." Over by the diner's pay phone. Heart hammering, I walked there, half expecting gunmen or an ambush. Instead, I glimpsed a woman in a hoodie, head lowered. She looked up. It was Lena, eyes rimmed with exhaustion and relief. Seeing her in person after all those weeks of silence felt surreal. We hesitated, then fell into a trembling hug. She cried into my shoulder, whispering apologies. I fought tears, too stunned to speak. Then an SUV pulled up. The FBI agents emerged, guiding us both calmly to the diner's back booth. Once inside, Lena spilled her entire story about discovering her boss's operation, being threatened, and fleeing when she feared she couldn't trust anyone. Agent Graham assured her she was safe now, that they'd help her testify. She clung to my hand the whole time. In that moment, my anger and heartbreak melted into something new: empathy. She'd made mistakes, huge ones, but her panic and desire to protect me, twisted though it was, shaped her actions. Over the next few hours, I watched her sign statements, listened to the agents detail next steps. The tension drained from her face as she realized she'd no longer run alone. I felt torn between relief and the remains of betrayal. Yet, seeing her vulnerability, I couldn't help but forgive on some level. We parted ways with the FBI that night, them promising to keep her in witness protection if necessary. Lena clutched my arm, eyes shining with uncertain hope. The next day, back in our hometown, my once empty house felt different as Lena hesitantly stepped inside. We were not the same couple who'd parted in confusion weeks ago. She'd stepped into a moral war zone, stumbling into dangerous secrets, misguidedly trying to shield me. And I'd been left with heartbreak and suspicion. Yet here we were, reunited by the unraveling of a criminal conspiracy. Could we rebuild our life from this chaos? In the living room, she sank onto the couch, tears brimming. She murmured, "I don't expect you to forget how I left, how I lied. But I'm begging you to understand why." I studied her haunted eyes. Part of me raged at her for not trusting me enough to handle her predicament from the start. Another part felt relieved she was alive, that she cared enough to come home eventually. "We'll figure it out," I whispered, voice trembling. Because in that moment, despite everything, FBI calls, dangerous secrets, her flight, I knew I still loved her, and maybe love was enough to navigate the darkness. I held her as she wept, my own tears falling in silent empathy. We were battered by secrets and regrets, but neither of us wanted to let go. Perhaps we'd never be the same easygoing couple we were before. But we discovered the extremes of loyalty, fear, and desperation that lay beneath the surface of everyday life. And maybe, ironically, that discovery could forge a bond strong enough to survive anything. Even the next ring of the phone, whenever it came,